Okay. Oh.
Okay. Use that.
Wait, is it the right,
Okay.
the right way? Do you have to swivel it?
Oh, I think you should.
Do you need it to the camera?
It's on.
Yeah, but which way do I look?
Right there.
Yeah, but that's pointing at me.
Oh. It's better.
There we go.
Thank you very much.
Okay. A priest, an atheist, and a rabbi wanted to see who of them had the most insight into the world. So the plan was that each one would go into the woods, find a bear, and attempt to convert it. Later, they all got together. The priest begins. When I found the bear, I read to him from the Bible and sprinkled him with holy water. Next week is his first communion. I found a bear by the stream, said the atheist, and I told him that love can rule the world, and there is no such thing as God. The bear was so mesmerised that he let me hug him. They both looked down at the rabbi, who was lying on a gurney, with his arm and leg in a cast, bandages on his face. Looking back, he said, maybe I shouldn't have started with the circumcision. Shavua Tov and good evening to everybody. Welcome to Caulfield Shul. My name is Alan Friedman. I would just like to introduce Rabbi Ganendi, who's the rabbi of the Shul. We have some other Rabbonim here. There's Rabbi Glassman, Rabbi Heilbrunn, and Rabbi Kahn I've seen. Thank you all for coming. The topic for discussion tonight is religion, feminism, atheism, fierce enemies or friendly foes. Now, Dennis Prager has some interesting thoughts on atheism. He says that if there is no God, then the terms good and evil are merely opinions. He has two main reasons he says that he believes in God. If there is no God, then life, says Dennis, is ultimately pointless, and humans have no more meaning than, say, rocks. He also says that he wants to live with hope. That is, in this world so saturated with injustice, that only a belief in a higher power and an afterlife can provide some meaning to the physical existence. Christopher Hitchens, on the other hand, takes a different point of view. He takes the view that religion has no rational basis, no explanation. Wars ultimately lead to a lot of violence. Religion leads to a lot of violence. And that miracles can't be proved. So what do? Do we see the hand of God working, or do we just see a whole lot of coincidences? Well, to take us through all this tonight, we have two guests. The subject will be discussed, debated, argued, analysed, and probably not resolved tonight, but we're going to give it a go anyway. Our guests are well known, I'm sure, to most people. We have Catherine Deveney, who is a comedian, author, writer. You've written 9 books, and she's very well known. She was a writer for The Age for nearly 10 years, I believe.
I wrote over 1,000 columns.
Okay, very good. And of course, Rabbi Shmuley is very well known to everybody, most famously known for his book Kosher Sex, but he's also written many books and is very well known in the Jewish world. So the format for tonight, it's going to be a discussion type situation. I'm going to ask each of them a couple of questions, and then they might ask each other some questions, and then a little bit later on in the evening we're going to have a Q&A type thing. And I will call him by his correct name, not Rabbi Botek, as Tony Jones called him on Q&A the other night.
That's better than Rabbi Biotech. I wish I was his biotech, but...
The $6 million rabbi.
Yeah, at least.
Okay, so I'm going to ask Catherine the first question, and one of the questions I've always wanted to ask an atheist is, what is your basis for morality? What drives your moral code? How would you explain that to us?
Okay, first, Shavua Tov. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Indigenous people. I'd like to acknowledge their ancestors, past, present and emerging. And I'd just like to acknowledge that we meet on their land. So, a lot of people ask atheists if if you don't believe in the Bible, where do you get your morality from? And I say that we get it from hardcore pornography, because we find that there's far less sexism, racism, rape and genital mutilation in hardcore pornography than in the Bible. Now that's stand-up, that's not the truth. I think it's worth noting that I was religious until I was 38 years old. And so I wasn't born into an atheist family. So where do I get my morals and values from? That's a good question. I get them from where we all get them, from basic human decency. Humans are social animals. The idea of morals and values has been hijacked by lots of different powers that be to make us feel that they are the ones that make us good and moral and pretty awesome. But the truth is that humans have done that on their own, and it's been hijacked for power, control, and to keep us in line.
Okay. Rabbi Shmuley, what would you say to that?
Well, I was hoping that Catherine, let me begin for a moment. Let me go back, dial this back. Shavua Tov. It's a pleasure to meet you, Catherine.
It's
Thank you for joining me.
And thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this panel. I love that in Australia they begin by showing respect for the indigenous peoples of this land. And because it was Judaism and the Bible that established the infinite worth and dignity of every individual, something that really was not recognized in a much more racist time, where white Caucasians, colonialists, were allowed to exploit indigenous peoples because they were seen as more backward, simply because they hadn't developed gunpowder or cannons. And along came the Bible and said that every human being is possessed of infinite worth. So when my friend Catherine, and we will be friends, God willing, says that decency comes from basic human values, I mean, my God, were that to be true, the whole reason you started so eloquently in acknowledging the traditional owners of the land is because we have done the exact opposite. We have exploited the weak. We have allowed the superior classes to decimate, annihilate, perpetrate genocides against those who were labeled enemies. Humankind has proven itself to be anything but a proper custodian of values. There is no one who can survey the history of the 20th century and not grasp for a higher morality. I fully recognize that religion has been guilty of horrible atrocities, and no doubt that will come up more than once tonight. People who abuse religion, people who use religion to justify or rationalize their racism. But the two most infamous movements that annihilated and massacred more people than any other in the modern era were atheist tautologies. One was Nazism.
He was a Catholic. Every single belt buckle had, in the name of God written on it. It's in the first chapter of Mein Kampf. That's pretty well known. I'm really surprised that you don't realise that he is a Catholic and he did it in the name of God. And he said to the Pope, "I'm just continuing your work, work as best I can, but do go on."
Well, that Pope, his name was Pius XII, and I spoke about him earlier today. They call him Hitler's Pope. Hitler remained on the Catholic rolls throughout his life. That is very true. But Nazism was a godless pagan tautology. And of course, Himmler reinstituted so many pagan rites to even be a member of the SS, let alone communism, which killed far more people than even Nazism, which is absolutely godless. Mao killed at least 40 million people. Stalin killed at least 30 million people. All of the horrors visited by religion, and there are many, throughout history doesn't equal any of these numbers. Now, that doesn't mean that an atheist is a murderer, of course. It doesn't mean that an atheist can't be a decent person. I'm actually someone who works primarily with secular people, and they show phenomenal decency. It just means that their decency does not come from within. It's what the Harvard philosopher Robert Nozick called cut flower ethics. The average atheist will borrow from religious ideas like Genesis saying that every human being is created in the equal image of God, because the blatant inequality of humankind is what is most evident. Some people have higher IQs than others. Some men have more perfect bodies than others. I don't want to draw attention to mine specifically this evening. Some people are richer than others. The blatant inequality of humankind is what is most evident. But the Bible says none of that matters because we're all equally God's children. So an atheist will take those ideas and his cut flower ethics. He will take the flowers from the garden where they grow, separate them, put them in a vase and say, well, we don't need the religious background for these ethics. We will just use it without God, without religion. The problem is it doesn't last because subjective morality becomes very personal to every culture that practices. We need objective morality that is established by an absolute authority. In this case, God. Your turn, Catherine.
You didn't answer the question. You didn't answer the question. And I came here, I was asked to do a debate and I refused. I said, I'm here for conversation. And that word salad, I can barely make any sense out of at all. It really alarms me that you're a person who has worked with human beings and worked on a really basic level of their relationships. You clearly want to create a community and support humans doing fantastic things with fantastic other people all the time. And for you to undermine the greatness of just the humans in the way that we have come and the way that we have formed is alarming, to say the least. And to be honest, I'm not interested in hearing your debating shtick. I'm really interested in finding out a bit more about you. Because if you want to see Shmuley debate, and please do, hop onto YouTube and you can see that very easily. I'm interested to find out from you things like, if you were born in a secular family, what job do you think you would have? Because you work in relationships, you work with people, you're an orator, you've been the rabbi at Oxford. Would you have been a psychologist? Do you think you would have been an academic? Would you have been a writer? What would you have been?
Well,
using the skills that you have, but being in a secular world.
Well, I'm very happy to shift the subject of tonight's discussion away from atheism and religion and make it entirely about me and my early childhood. In fact, I have long been my own favorite subject. But I just fear that I will bore the fine men and women who came to hear us this evening. But I will answer that question. But let me go back to the salad of verbosity that I started with. And I love salad, by the way. I don't eat healthy and I should have a lot more salad. You were saying that humanity can be trusted for decency. And there's no person who can read human history and believe that. That's an impossible thing to believe. Humanity has been the most appalling steward of morality. And like I said, you started it very eloquently by saying that colonialists had come to Australia or gone to the United States and just had, I don't know if it was as bad here as what happened, say, in the Americas, but just raped the native populations, decimated them, brought disease that wiped out 80% of them.
We know all of this.
So why would you trust humanity?
Because we have got access to a whole lot of things that we once didn't. The God of the gaps, I'm sure you're aware of, is when, as soon as science has come in and helped us understand why certain things have happened, then suddenly God no longer was the creator or the divine magician who did these things. I know, and it's not a matter of believing, that human beings are good despite religion and not because of it. Who here believes that human beings are good despite religion, not because of it? Who here believes that we are good because of religion? Do you think that your morals and values and that you're a better person because you're religious than I am because I am not religious?
Okay, I still have to answer your question about what profession I would have chosen.
Yes, I know, we'll get back to that, but there's a point to that.
The answer is a hedge fund manager for sure. God has already promised me that after suffering for 30 years as a rabbi, I'm going to be reincarnated, not as like a cabbage or something, but I'm coming back as a hedge fund manager, and he better keep his word to me. I'm going to have a yacht. It's going to be really cool. And if any of you want to invest with me in my next life, you can subscribe now at a discount, so it's like a good you said, are we good people because of religion, despite religion? Let me just go to the predicate of the question. Are we good people? Christianity says we're born into original sin, so we're not good from our birth. I reject that. Secular humanists find people like Catherine say that we're good people, the opposite of Christianity, because they have no choice but to say that, because if people are not good, then what do you hang your hat on? You don't believe in God, you have to believe in humanity. Judaism is in the middle. It says that people are neither good nor bad, they're born innocent. And their actions will determine whether they're good or bad. I don't know if anyone here is good or bad. It's going to come down to their actions. There are people here who may be a little bit narcissistic and selfish, but they give a lot of charity. That makes them good. There may be some husbands or wives here who kind of love their spouses, but they may not be faithful behind closed doors. And that doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means there's a certain inconsistency in their morality, and we all have to try to be better. But to say that we're all naturally good, I'm arguing with that very premise. I think that we need moral inspiration to be good, and our actions will determine if we're good. We're all a blank slate. A child is born, and they're not good or bad. Their actions will determine what they become. I'm sure you would agree with that, no?
Yes, I do agree. But so I asked, what job do you think you'd have if you were born in a secular world? Because to be honest, you are aware that you're only Jewish because of random chance of the family that you were born in and the 5,000 years of generations of Jewish people. So if you were born in Ireland, you would have been Catholic or Protestant. You're aware of that. So it's just chance and destiny that you weren't born into a secular family. So I'm interested in using your skills. What do you think you would end up being? It's
a very fair question. No matter what I would be, I would still only buy wholesale. That's a very fair question. I really became a rabbi. My father's not a rabbi. There's no one. Which is
unusual.
There's no one in my family who's a rabbi. I became a rabbi because of my parents' divorce. I felt that, wow, if the people who kind of brought me into this world don't like each other much anymore, there's got to be some secret to keeping marriages together. There must be. I wanted to understand human nature more deeply, and that I wanted to use the pain of my parents' divorce to be a blessing to others in trying to keep people together. And I love conversations like these because I think religion can be very divisive. I love when it brings people together in a intelligent and important conversation. We Jews, I discussed this today in the shul just an hour ago, we Jews are very often put on the defensive with having to combat anti-Semitism, having to combat anti-Israel demonization, so we don't get the opportunity to teach our values and teach our morals and be a light unto the nations because we're always kind of just trying to survive and get by. Correct.
Yeah, totally.
Correct. So I would much rather, I don't know if it's a psychologist or anything else, but yeah, I would like to try to figure out how the human mind and heart operate so that we can dedicate it to strong relationships, be a blessing to others.
Because as I was coming into this discussion, I was thinking a lot about the cogs that make people move towards and away from religion. So, my own moving away from religion at the age of 38, I've talked to a lot of other people about what brought them to religion and what made their families move away from religion, because often it's a family thing. Sometimes it's a whole family moves away. Sometimes somebody has gone against the laws and the teachings and the doctrines, so they're pushed away. Sometimes it's just chance of being able to get away. So my question is, and I'm sure you've had this before, because you speak a lot on this topic, and I don't want this to feel stale at all, but what do you get out of religion and being Jewish, and what would you lose if you walked away? What are you getting out of it? Because I always think that question. I ask myself that question. What am I getting out of holding these beliefs? What am I getting as a person? And what would I lose by not thinking that there is no God, there is no bigger picture, and this is all there is? I think it's really good to turn the light in on ourselves and ask us, what are we getting out of this? Buying into these frequent flyer, these loyalty programs, which so many things, and religion is definitely one of them.
Well, what I get out of being Jewish is just feels so good to be hated. I mean, it's it's just fun. It's just like being part of the most hated group in the history of the world. I won the lottery. I mean, wow.
I'm sorry, Shmuley, you don't understand. I am a woman I have a vagina and an opinion. I'm a part of the group of the most hated people in the world. But do go on, Shmuley.
Do you really believe that, Catherine?
Absolutely. There's nothing more hated than a woman with an opinion? Nothing. And you can look through history and find it again and again. That's good.
Okay. We'll get to some audience discussion.
What if you're a man like me who's deeply in touch with his feminine side, and who has opinions? Anyway, by the way, I do agree that in modern times there's an assault against women. I don't just mean things like Me Too. There's an assault against women that they're not even really aware of or speak out sufficiently against, which is that for the two most natural processes of human living, just eating and aging is considered a sin or a crime for a woman. That's an incredible thing. I sit and listen to the deepest secrets of married couples as they share them in marital counseling, and they'll tell me about their sex lives, they'll tell me about their intimate lives, they'll tell me, and I'm a stranger, and there's no issue. And the moment I'll say to a woman, and how old are you? How dare you? To ask a personal question like that.
Do they really say that? That's
How many women celebrate a birthday? How many
all
women?
of my friends.
That's great. So
you know what?
women are very...
Aging is a privilege.
I
As
agree.
we all know,
I
it's
agree.
a total
I
privilege.
agree. But women today are made to feel that they have to conform to a certain beauty standard, and they feel bad about themselves. Like,
I understand what you're saying, but I just want a small edit. You're saying women. I'm saying women that you have got contact with, and women. Not all women. Hashtag not all women. So there's a lot of us out there who loving your body exactly how it is an act of civil disobedience. Eating precisely what you want and not being at all concerned about it is an act of civil disobedience. There's a bunch of us out there, so don't be. So it's great that you're aware of that. It really is. But I want you to know that it's not all, and there is an opportunity to move from fear towards love and acceptance, and plenty of us are doing it and have always done it.
And to live from within, and to have an inner identity, and not just always worry what people think about you. But let me now segue using that into your very important question about what do I get from being religious. Well, that's part of it.
Yeah.
I'm the father of 6 daughters and 3 sons. I want my daughters...
Nuggets?
Thank God. I want my daughters to have that kind of self-confidence where they have an inner identity. Being religious teaches me, number one, that some things in life that cannot be sensed, touched, smelled, the things that are invisible. That's the first great lesson of religion. The reason why we Jews don't have a Jesus Christ is we don't believe that God who takes a form is superior to the God who is transcendent. There are certain things in life that are transcendent. When we speak about a woman, for example, we try to train our men in our community to love a woman holistically, even the things that can't be seen, her character, her conviction, her passions, her values, not just her body, her breasts, her legs. We don't reduce people to those kind of body parts the way a material world would. We try not to judge men only by the accoutrements that they have acquired, which is again a materialist view. We judge them by the good deeds they've acquired, which again are invisible, what we call a mitzvah. I gain all of that from being Jewish. It's my value system. I gain my values from being Jewish. And just one final point. When you say that are we better off, are we good people without religion as opposed to being good people with religion, let us remember, right now, there may be alternatives to religion that are not Darwinian. But right now, the single biggest alternative to creation or religion is Darwinian. It's evolution. And the issue with Darwin went to the Galapagos Islands, which my wife took me to as a 40th birthday present. And I began to understand how he came up with a theory of evolution at the Galapagos. They're beautiful but brutal islands. Everything alive is eating and devouring something else which is inferior. And you see it happening before your eyes. It's remarkable. And Darwin was there on the HMS Beagle, and he said, oh, this must be happening among humanity as well. Now, today, evolutionary doctrine rejects interracial. We believe that all humanity stems perhaps from one ancestor in Africa, so thank God it's not racial. But Darwinian ethics are might makes right. Darwinian ethics are that the strong and powerful dominate. Religion says that the Bible says that God watches us to see how we treat the powerless widow. That God watches us to see how we treat the powerless orphan. And that He will punish us, because He's more powerful, if we don't treat them equitably. And I make one final point. I actually think, Catherine, that Hitler which is the worst word in the Jewish community, and hopefully in the rest of the world as well, I think there was a certain scary, terrifying logic to some of the things that he did that can't be fully refuted without religion. Specifically when he started, he didn't begin to murder the Jews. He first murdered the handicapped. And he came along and he basically said, look, Germany is experiencing hyperinflation. We don't have money. And Germany has very limited resources. Why are we giving hospital beds to boys and girls who will be nothing but a burden to their parents, who will never have the intellectual acumen of anything more than a 5-year-old? And studies show, by the way, in our times, that something like 90% of parents who have a mentally handicapped child divorce, and it consumes the resources of the family. Why are we keeping them alive? For every one of them, we could be supporting 20, 30 German children. There was a certain logic to it, a scary, frightening logic, to which the only response is that there is not a quality of life, but a sanctity of life that only comes from religion.
I wanted to get, so you just said you had 6 daughters. I want to make one point and and ask 2 questions. I wanted to know, and this is a yes, no. Do you consider yourself a feminist?
Yes.
No? Great. Okay. Well, let's move from there. And another thing I'm curious about is, so you were talking about women and treating them with respect. Why are women all othered in monotheistic religions? Why, why are they seen as something other than just a Jewish person, but a Jewish woman? The wigs, the having to put a piece of fabric up your vagina and handing it to your husband and showing it to the rabbi to say that you're clean to have sex with, that is something that is, to me, incompatible with humanity and decency. And if you say to me that my religion makes me good, and I know that there's 613 laws to follow in the Talmud, why some and not the others? It says that homosexuality is an abomination. You are pro LGBTQI, and congratulations. Here, there are so many people who would be calling themselves, I am Orthodox but not religious. They're driving their cars on Shabbat. They're not killing people for desecrating Shabbat. They're going to Chaston. They're going to the football. Why do you choose some rules and not the others? Why does God care what you do with your hair, what you eat, how you wash yourself, whether you're clean enough to have sex with? I truly don't understand it. If he is so great and good and powerful, why does he give a flying monkeys what we do, what with our hair and our body and what we eat? That is something I don't understand. And the treatment of women in monotheistic religion, and I have been one, is can be considered nothing but oppressive. My take on religion, all religion, is it's simply a Trojan horse for misogyny, homophobia, racism and discrimination. That is my take. But I'm particularly interested because I can see with a lot of the things that you've said, and I understand about you, that you seem to see women in a more modern sense, but still you are supporting this medieval and archaic system that oppresses women. Women getting married and having to wear wigs, that is insane. Putting the knife in the wrong drawer, and because you put the meat knife in the wrong sink and burying it in the backyard for a week, like that is, if my kids did that, I would take them to a psychiatrist. I would take them to a psychiatrist. There's a great guy, and I bet you I'll forget his name. He came from a long line of rabbis, and he won this award for making an argument that that religion is a mental illness. And it was really interesting. What was that guy's name? Mark Turney, can you remember? He was, I remember, Robert Sapolsky? Does anybody, so Robert Sapolsky. And he made this amazing, so once upon a time, religion helped keep us alive. If I was born in the Jewish faith, chances are I would still be a member of, I would be sitting here in the audience. Because what a wonderful thing to be born into. What an enviable, I have envied your sense of community, your sense of ritual, your in-jokes. I grew up with You Don't Have to Be Jewish. I was listening to that when I was 8 years old. I've always been fascinated by the Jewish culture and envious of your amazing communities that you can buy straight into. My friend, John Safran, who you guys all know, I don't know whether you've met John, he's a comedian and writer here. He was talking on a podcast with another comedian, and Dave O'Neill. And Dave O'Neill was saying, you know, you Jews are so lucky. You set up a business, everybody goes, great, we'll come to you. You know, you've got a ready-made audience, a ready-made client base, ready-made customers walking through your door. So in Australia, you say, I'm going to set up a shop. They go, what are you going to do that for? You're an idiot. So I can see the frequent flyer thing. I can see the benefits of religion. And as a woman, I can see the absolute benefits in hijacking regular, normal, fantastic human qualities and putting a pillar in the dog food, which is oppression and ways for powers that be to control people and decide what they do in the bedroom, what they do with their money, how they're able to participate in public life. So So I wanted to make a point about hypocrisy, about the cherry picking from the laws, why this law and why not. And, you know, I wanted to ask, who here has driven on Shabbat? Who here has gone to the football, turned a light on? You know, when you've got Jewish people who find they're staying in a hotel room with a sensor light outside on Shabbat, and they realise that they go, well, we can't leave the room because we'll accidentally turn the light on. That is not rational thinking. So I really want to ask you about is it cognitive dissonance, or how you reconcile your feminism with the sexist treatment of women I'm not just going to point to the Jewish religion, we are talking about religion, we're talking about monotheistic religions across the board, okay?
Can you repeat the question?
You got it, Shmuley, you got it. You said, yes, you're a feminist, and I said, yeah, but. Okay. Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C.
You know, Catherine, I heard so much about you before I came here. I thought you were going to ask me a challenging question. You know, pitching me this Lakshan. I mean, come on. Firstly, let me try to respond to the issues you raised in their order as I remember them. You first spoke about women doing vaginal checks. There's a lot of...
That is creepy. That is absolutely creepy. Does anyone here think that is not creepy? One person, two people, thank you for your honesty. 3 people, 4 people, 5, thank you for your honesty. I really appreciate it.
So let me first say that there's many misconceptions about Jews and sex.
There's a twinkle in his eye, ladies and gentlemen.
No, I was waiting for this question. My favorite question! When I wrote Kosher Sex, I remember that wherever I went to speak about it, the first question that was asked of me is, why do Jews have sex through a sheet with a hole in the middle? Who has heard that Jews have sex through a sheet with a hole in the middle?
Yeah.
Okay. And I told them the truth, that it's not true, it's a lie, we Orthodox Jews, Jews don't have sex through a sheet with a hole in the middle, because only Reform Jews do that. We Orthodox Jews have sex in 2 separate bedrooms through a hole in the wall. Because you can't get too close, right? And ultra-Orthodox Jews, I was taught in yeshiva that we had to have sex in full body armor, which is really inconvenient. It's very hard to maneuver. So first let me unpack what you said about women doing vaginal checks and the laws of Nida. The biggest problem, and I'll be quick because these are big subjects, the biggest problem in the disintegration of marriage is not fighting over finances, which ranks high, it's not parental intervention, which ranks high. The number one cause of the death of marriage is loss of desire. It's people drifting apart. Which is what you would expect, right? We like reading the newspaper, we like things that are new and novel. Nobody watches the same movie over and over again unless you're a guy who watches Titanic because you like seeing Leonardo DiCaprio drown, or you're jealous of his good looks. Or, we like novelty. So monogamy is almost unsustainable unless you can maintain desire. So the first thing that Judaism, you said you envy our sense of community,
yes, and
hopefully our families. The Jewish marriage is actually based on erotic impediments that sustain desire. So, for example,
I'm terrified. What are you going to play? Okay.
Yeah.
Here's a muffler. Here's some lube.
Oh, you'd be really surprised what we sell on kosher.sex. Go take a look.
Okay.
And Catherine, you're now part of the mishpacha. You get The friends and family discount. I just want you to know.
Thank you.
So this is the most successful consumer product in the history of the world. It's called an iPhone. And Steve Jobs was not an engineer. He dropped out of college. He was a marketer. And he understood three things about lust. Number one, he understood that you can make people lust after a telephone. Not just after the body. You can get them to stand online for hours, the way Romeo stood outside of Juliet's balcony to buy a telephone. The second thing he understood is the way you do that is you make it impossible to buy the telephone. You have to make them unavailable. He only put 300 phones every time Apple launches a new product. And the second thing is mystery. Never talk about what you're working on. Apple's hyper-mysterious. And the third thing is sinfulness. Create a company that has a counter-cultural culture. Apple was called Think Different. The 1984 famous Super Bowl commercial was Apple challenging IBM. It's considered the most successful TV commercial in history. Judaism and sex is very similar. Number one, if men find women and wives way too available, desire is diminished. So before I get into the actual mechanics of nida, the essence is that a wife should be sinful, prohibited to her husband. It's an actually fascinating concept. The man who goes to, say, Bondi Beach and sees thousands of women wearing a bikini, you know what most men do on the beach? I mean, here's thousands of women exposing a lot of flesh. They do one of two things. They either fall asleep or they play frisbee. It's not that erotic. But if they're walking home and they suddenly see a woman who left the blinds to her bedroom open and she's walking while wearing her undergarments, exposing the same amount of flesh, what goes through that man's mind? As he's walking, oh my God, a woman left her blinds open. I'm peering into the privacy of her bedroom. Oh my God, who has a frisbee? Where is there a frisbee? That's not going to happen because it's sinful. The first thing we did is we made our wives sinful. It's a fascinating concept. Sinful marriages. The second thing we did is make sex unavailable, a period of sexual separation. Because it's what we relationship experts call erotic obstacles. There have to be obstacles to desire. The world that the secular person inhabits, with all due respect, it's a world devoid of erotic desire. We now have husbands and wives who are best friends. What does that even mean? What do? Watch the football together? Do you dorm together? It's a sad commentary on the loss of erotic desire. Why do we not use words like lovers and soulmates? Why do we use the word partners? Because we don't even expect to maintain more than a sexual average of once a week, which is the national average in the United States. I know the Australian guys are saying, wait a second. For us, it's 3 or 4 times a day. I get it. We Americans are not Superman, okay? We cannot compete with you Aussies. So, the nida cycle regulates sinfulness, mysteriousness, unavailability. Why is it determined specifically by blood and by a vaginal check? Because what is critical to Judaism, the reason why our people, thank God, have never been guilty of horrendous atrocities like decimating other nations, and that's what people want to accuse Israel of falsely today, is because we always separate life from death. The Jewish religion is about a profound separation between life and death. We don't have any graves in our synagogues the way churches do. We bury only outside of our cities. We're not allowed to see blood. If we shecht our animals, the blood has to be immediately covered because God wants us to be repulsed by death. So the idea of menstruation was simply, there's nothing unclean about a woman who's menstruating. It's a ritual impurity. There's nothing unclean. It's a separation between a procreative act, lovemaking, which is procreative, and blood represents the loss of the opportunity for life. It doesn't represent any kind of uncleanliness. Now, we can disagree about this and you can say, well, I don't like your explanation. But I will tell you that I counsel marriages. And the biggest problem in marriages is the sexual famine that is starving marriages today because sex has become obsolete. 1 out of 3 American marriages, they don't have sex at all anymore. And sex really is 7 minutes a week for those that are having it. On Q&A, I joke that includes the time that men spend begging. But so, you know, in the final analysis, what I look at in a religion, like I'm not a Mormon. I don't believe that when I die, I'm going to get my own planet and become the god of that planet. In fact, I wish I were a Mormon. I would love to be God and have a planet. But I look at whether Mormonism works as a religion in terms of creating compassionate people, people who are charitable. We're not going to subscribe to everyone's faith beliefs. What you said is illogical. I will tell you tons of things about the secular world that are utterly illogical. I think it's illogical to make a woman into a sex object who's expected to dress in a way that is erotically desirable to men, etc., etc., etc. And now we're seeing a backlash to that. Where did that ever make sense? That's not a religious concept. I think it's illogical to believe that life is about a series of accidents that led to this magical thing called life, where people are judged only by being, for thousands of years, and it hasn't changed, by being hunter-gatherers. Men are trained, especially universities, to hunt sexual opportunities at night and to gather money during the day, and that women really are just impressed with the guy who has the biggest toys. And where is that logical? There's nothing logical about that. That doesn't make any sense. And yet our whole culture is built on that. The Forbes 400 list, the richest Australians. We read this crap constantly. Where is the logic in that? That a man who has more money is actually more valuable and we should talk about them day and night? Or someone who can kick a ball into a net or throw an orange ball through a hoop is vastly more valuable than someone else? That doesn't make sense. And I'll make one final point. When I debated Richard Dawkins at Idea City we did many debates, but in Toronto, he started by saying, Shmuley is a hypocrite. He believes in this thing called God, and it's a persecutorial or something like that system, which God tells us He's going to punish us, and then it was my turn, and I said, Richard, with all due respect, I have beliefs that you probably find to be illogical, offensive, and yet you're British. You subscribe to a belief that says that one woman was born with blue blood, superior to everybody else, and we should talk about her family day and night. You do any DNA testing on a very fine woman named Queen Elizabeth II, or her husband Prince Philip, or Prince Charles, I bet you will find that their DNA is exactly the same as everybody else's. And yet you subscribe to this myth of royalty. That never bothered you. So it's just a matter of kind of choosing the myths. So why does Richard Dawkins subscribe to royalty and the Queen? Because it works, right? Because for 1,000 years it has kept the order in Great Britain and their sentimentality and history. Now for me it's more than that. I believe there is truth to this and God exists. But if you're going to point out the hypocrisy and illogical of a religious system, I can easily expose the hypocrisy and illogical nature of a secular system.
You talked about the laws of nature, but and I understand about blood things. So following your train of thought, it still doesn't make any. It's still creepy as to have a man take a piece of fabric that's been into a woman's vagina and show it to another man.
Shouldn't be a man. I totally agree. It should be women who can bring these things about spotting and blood to other women. Should not be a man. I agree.
Women are othered in monotheistic women. Why are women just not trusted to say, "I'm good to go"? That's what I'm interested in. So I know a lot of people in this audience, and this is why I'm here, will either be, many of you are closet atheists or agnostics, or curious about what your life would look like without the magic guy in the sky and adhering to the rules. I know that there's a lot of people here that are interested in that. I know that there's people who will die going along with the 613 rules and their Torah and their shul and all of that. But I know that many of you here are kind of interested in what that would look like, that little cog to move away a little further. I want to tell a short story, and the question I'm going to be asking at the end of the story is, do you think it's possible to be a Jewish atheist? Because currently there are secular shuls that are starting up where they are turning people away at Yom Kippur because there's so many people who are turning up. These are people who are looking at kind of a humanist religion and not an authoritarian one, not one thinking about an invisible man in the sky and keeping with these laws that don't make much sense in the year 2019 or wherever we are. So I'm against marriage, and I've never married. But I've got 3 children, and I repartnered 9 years ago with a gorgeous guy who I was in love with when I was 19. When we got together, he said, "Would you like to get married?" And I said, "No, of course not. I don't do marriage." And most men don't want me to get married either. They just generally do it so they can, be a pleaser and do what's expected of them. And he said, "Can we wear rings?" And I said, "I'm very happy to wear rings." And he said, "Why don't we have a party? Like a love party, like a party to celebrate with our friends, the love that we share, because I feel so lucky and happy." And I said, "Yes, let's do that." So we did. So in 2016, we had a love party. So a love party was a wedding without a marriage. No God, no government. We had everything. We had the certificate, we had the reception, I wore a veil, I had a bouquet of flowers, we had flower girls, we had two of our friends wearing, kind of black reverend robes with rainbow scarves around their necks. They wrote this beautiful ceremony. We sang Imagine, because it was a secular ceremony. We had a procession. We did all of those things, and it was amazing because people always said to me, I got married because I want to have the party. I got married because I wanted my dad to give me away. I got married because I wanted to change my name. I got married because I wanted to have this or that and be in a church. And I said, you don't have to do any of those. You don't have to have God or the government in your bedroom to have any of those things. Any single one of those things. You can change your name, you can have your dad walk down the aisle, you can do all of those things without government or God. And so we proved it, and we did it. And there were so many people who could not pull apart the idea of a wedding and a marriage. So I want to tell that story to just shed light on the idea of the Jewish culture and the Jewish religion. That it is possible and it is happening. And if that is something that keeps you in a place of cognitive dissonance, saying, this stuff doesn't make sense to me anymore, but I love the idea of being religious. I love the idea of the Jewish religion, but those very old rules that make no sense in this day and age make no sense to me. And also, I'm committed to moving forward as a community into the future. And that is not going to happen in this day and age when we've got such enlightened young people who have so much access to rational thought and education and information. The best way for you to stop your community moving forward is to keep telling them things you know are not true and real. Because they will move away. They will say, this does not make any sense to me anymore, so I walk away from the whole lot. The only way for us all to move forward is to leave these medieval things which are not true and real, that we cannot prove, and move forward with secular values of love, of science, of rational thought, of compromise, of negotiation. So, Shmuley, is it possible, do you think, to be a Jewish atheist? Oh, the mutter. Did you hear the mutter? Oh, what's Shmuley going to say? I'm sure he knows. I'm sure he's been asked this before. That's not a question he wouldn't have been asked.
Well, what's going to happen is that I'm going to say, watch this is pretty cool. I'm going to say...
I'm not going anywhere, Shmuley.
No, watch this. Because you got to make sure there isn't too much distance between us, Catherine, because in a moment, notice the exact opposite. I'm afraid for your... what's going to happen, I'm going to say yes, and at any moment, I'm going to be struck by lightning and incinerated. But God can sometimes be off by about a foot. So, I don't want you being punished for my blasphemy.
Blasphemy is a victimless crime. It's quite alright.
Okay. Of course you could be a Jewish atheist. I would say that probably most of the Jews that I know and work with are probably Jewish atheists. I'll say something now that I have not told before, but we have this big gala event coming up at Carnegie Hall, March 28th, 3 weeks, on my organization, the World Values Network. And one of the people we're honoring is Sir Clive Gillinson. He's the Chief Executive and Chief Creative Officer for Carnegie Hall. He's a Jewish atheist. I married him and his Jewish wife. I think his first wife was not Jewish. His wife is Jewish. And he got up and he said, the reason why I asked Rabbi Shmuley to marry me is because he taught me that I could be a good Jew and a good atheist. And that was very flattering, and I looked back at him in front of all of his weddings, and I said, Clive, that's nice, but just pay. And that was a joke. Everyone's looking at me, yeah, I bet you said that. Okay. Of course you can be a Jewish atheist. In fact, there's a debate between Maimonides and Nachmanides, two of the greatest rabbis that ever lived, whether there's even a commandment to believe in God. Judaism is a religion of action. It's not a religion of ideology. I spoke about this last night. One of the supreme Jewish values is you're judged by what you do and not by what you believe. We don't burn people to the stake for not having the right beliefs. But we do judge people based on their actions. I will judge you right now based on your actions. I think it's beautiful that you got married in a non-religious, non-God ceremony. Okay. Commitment ceremony or something.
No, it wasn't commitment ceremony. That's the point.
It was great that you had a non-commitment, non-wedding, non-romantic, non-love, nothing. The nothingness of what you did is inspiring and uplifting. Never before has nothingness moved me so much, like the nothingness that you engaged in. So I'm glad you didn't do anything. I love to see love. So I said I'm a child of divorce. My mother is an Orthodox Jewish woman who had an unhappy marriage, and she has lived together with a man. They are not married for many years. She was turned off of marriage, so she's not planning to get married. And she's an Orthodox Jewish woman. And is that a contradiction? I love seeing her with a man that she loves and that loves her. It's a beautiful thing for me. I used to feel very guilty, to be honest, as a teenager, going anywhere on a Saturday night. Not that what was growing up in Chabad on a Saturday night? Oh, we're going to study Talmud, yeah. Whoa, Saturday nights are electrifying. But even going anywhere, my mother was alone, bothered me. So there's a human component to our religion, of course, Catherine. And I'm very happy. Are you still with that man? I'm sorry.
Okay. Yes.
That's wonderful. God bless you. Or whatever is out there. Wherever you are, bless her. The cosmos. The infinite expanse of emptiness. Bless Catherine and her union. Or non-union. But you say that you speak about marriage as if it's an oppressive institution.
It is.
Okay, for women. So I would actually say, I always do this little experiment when I speak about relationships. And by the way, is there someone that, I'm sorry, I don't want to bother. Can I have one of my books, do you mind? Yeah. This is not a blatant plug. It's only an advertisement. I just published this book of Pamela Anderson called Lust for Love. So it's available. My wife and I really don't want to schlep this back across the Pacific, please. I think I'll pay you guys to take some home, okay? But, in this book, I ask a simple question. And it's a question I've asked from live audiences everywhere. And it tests your theory about whether marriage is something imposed on women by religion or society. Sigmund Freud was famously asked by Napoleon Bonaparte's great niece, Marie Bonaparte. I think in the 1930s, he was asked by her, what is it that a woman wants? And he couldn't answer it. This man who had fathomed the innermost recesses of the human mind, Rabbi Deveney and I were speaking about Freud today, he couldn't answer this famous question, what does a woman want? And he was always accused of being a misogynist because he saw women as a castrated male. So let me ask the women here, what is it that a woman wants? What does a woman want?
Respect. Okay. Respect, and to be treated just equally, and for our gender to be, people be aware of our gender and how we've been oppressed, and how we are not treated equally in all different ways, whether it's financial, emotional, social, political, treated with equality and respect.
Okay, so women want respect and equality. So if you look at take a great feminist. You asked me if I was a feminist, and I said I'm a feminist based on my definition of feminism, that a woman is equal to a man in every respect and should develop her potential as much as a man in every respect. And that's what I encourage in my daughters. And may I just say, because she's sitting here in the front row, that I've been married 31 years next week, and my wife has really earned my respect as a very unique person. And so that's what a feminist means to me. So if a woman wants respect and equality, then I have to ask why great feminists like Gloria Steinem ended up marrying. It kind of surprised people. She was opposed to marriage her whole life. So what I've discovered is that, and women, for the most part, women say to me they want to be loved. Everyone wants to be loved. But if you want to be loved, you should never leave your parents' household. No one's going to love you as much as your mother and father. Your mother and father are probably not going to cheat on you. They're not going to go to Penelope, the next door neighbor's daughter, in the middle of the night and say, here's a secret Christmas present. Don't tell anybody. You're the daughter we really love and we should have had. Your parents are not going to divorce you. They're not going to sit you down and say, look, Susan, your mother and I feel this is not working out between us. So we're going to move to an apartment. You can have the house. But a man can do that. So why is it that in a secular age where every sexual religious taboo has disappeared, like premarital sex today, if you don't have premarital sex, you're seen as weird. So that's gone. The only thing that remains is the kind of horrible things that we saw recently here in Australia, that was discussed in Q&A with Cardinal Pell, very painful things. Anyone who desecrates and violates the innocence of a child, and not to compare them, God forbid, that's utterly incomparable. But what also remains is adultery and infidelity, and people's respect for marriage is bizarre. If a politician cheats on his wife or cheats on her husband, she probably will not be elected. It's a remarkable thing. In a secular age, President Trump is being accused of having covered up a tryst with a Playboy model. He denies it. That's a big story in our country. President Clinton was essentially impeached over adultery in a secular age. And every Hollywood romantic comedy, or what we call, disrespectfully I would say, chick flicks, they all end with a marriage ceremony in a secular age. Why? Because a woman does not want to be loved. Like I said, she would stay with her parents. She wants to get the one thing from a man that her parents cannot give her. And what is that one thing? Her parents can give her respect. Her parents can give her admiration. Why does she leave the protection of their home for the wild blue yonder of life with a guy? Answer, she wants the one thing her parents can't give her. What is it? Starts with a C.
Okay.
No, child. Yeah, oh my God. Okay, we went there. Okay.
Companionship.
The one thing that a man can give a woman that her parents cannot give her, or a partner, I should say, even if it's a same-sex partnership, is chosenness. Someone can choose you. Your parents can't choose you. When your mother tells you you're the prettiest girl in the whole class, you don't say, "Oh my God, it's true." You roll your eyes because you know that she has a genetic AK-47 to her head making her say it. But when someone you're not related to says it, you feel chosen. So marriage, I actually think that marriage is hardwired into our DNA. I think the reason why marriage persists in a secular age is we want to feel chosen. And marriage is and notice that we all, for the most part, get married in public, and secular people want to get married in public, because in order to feel chosen, the selection has to involve a deselection. Everyone needs to know that you're kind of off limits, that you belong to each other. And I have no problem using words like belonging to each other and possessiveness, etc., where it's respectful, where it's based on volition and choice, where a woman wants to be chosen by a man and vice versa. I don't see it as an oppressive institution. It can be oppressive. But let me just say this, because I don't want to go on beyond this. I actually think that atheism and religion, where's Robert Reel? Where's Robert? Robert and I, thank you for organizing everything. We're very grateful. Robert and I were, I should really thank everyone at the Colford Synagogue, Rabbi Genendi and Robert, but Robert and I, when we were coming up with this title, I specifically said, is religion, are we foes, are we friends? Catherine, religion has so much to learn from atheism. Religion has been guilty, with all of the blessings that I feel I received from being a religious man and a Jewish man and a rabbi, and you said that it was arbitrary, and perhaps. But I do believe in embracing my identity. Maybe my gender was also arbitrary. I could have been born a woman. My friend Caitlyn Jenner changed her gender, and now she is a woman, and she told me she's much happier. But I'm a man, and I'm a Jewish man, and I'm a rabbi, and whether it's arbitrary or cosmic and preordained, I think you have to embrace who you are, and I have great respect for people who embrace. I love seeing religious Muslims. I love seeing religious Jews. I still love seeing religious Christians, as long as they're open and loving and tolerant. But religion has been guilty of horrific atrocities throughout the ages, and who knows that more than the Jews, who are usually the targets of that of those religious crimes, the Crusades. So we have so much to learn from atheistic challenges, and it's not like I'm batting away some of the things that you're saying. I believe that religion has to be logical. But let me just say one final thing. We have to be careful not to engage of the tyranny of logic, because life has to have some mystery, it has to have some super-rational dimension. Because if you become too logical, what's logical about democracy? Why should any of you who doesn't have a PhD in economics have the same say about how to get Australia out of a recession as a Nobel Prize winning economist? You shouldn't. Democracy makes no sense, none whatsoever, unless it's built on the verse in Genesis that says that even if you're not a Nobel Prize winning economist, you're the equal of someone who's got one, and you have an equal say in the direction of the country. There's nothing logical about that. That's why freedom and democracy are on the decline. People can't find good arguments for them in an age of hyper-nationalism, etc. Why is it logical for us to actually believe in love? My friend Richard Dawkins used to tell me in debates all the time that love is nothing but a fiction played on us by our genes for the perpetuation of the species. He will tell you, every evolutionary biologist will tell you, the only thing that matters is the survival of the species. Love is nothing but a fantasy that our genes create in our minds so that we have sex and raise our children and let them marry. So there's plenty of things in life that are utterly illogical. Now, I don't believe in being irrational, but I do believe in being super-rational and embracing those things that transcend logic.
There's plenty of, I'm not the only atheist here. I'm the only shiksa, I think. But there's plenty for you to not understand the mystery that atheists have in our own life. There's plenty of mystery. There's relationships, there's love, there's science, there's nature, there's plenty of it. What kind of interests me tonight about this discussion is talking about the why do we stay and why do we leave. I'm interested in, by show of hands, how many people here actually follow the 613 laws?
I follow every single one.
Because Shmuley, who is, we know that the Jewish teaching is that homosexuality is an abomination. Who believes that here? Is homosexuality an abomination?
God's calling.
So I'm interested in, do you think that you should be killing the descendants of the Amalekites? If you did a DNA test, my friend Lou Fox, she was at my place a few months ago. We did a DNA test.
She's an Amalekite?
No.
I have to go and kill her right now.
That's it. So Lou...
I'll be right back.
So Louise Fox is one of our finest script writers, and she's one of our very most famous Jewish women in Australia. And I've done this DNA test, and we've got some cheap ones, and we're a bit drunk. We're having some fags. We're having a good chat. And I said, Lou, I know you're Jewish, but well, what nationality is there in there? She goes, I don't know. She goes, I get in a cab, they go, you Turkish, you Greek, what are you? And I said, I've got this last test. Why don't you do it? And we did it, and it came back, and I said, you have to call me. The test is in. And she said, what is it? So we'd done this. She thought maybe she was 30% German, 15% Polish, some Iranian, whatever. She's 92% Ashkenazi Jew. 92%. I don't even think Shmuley is 92% Ashkenazi Jew. And it was fascinating to me. So I wonder, in those laws, killing the Amalekites. So I found out that I'm 18% Ashkenazi Jew. So if I eat bread on Passover, am I sinning? Yes, hands up, am I sinning?
18% of you is.
18% of me is. Thanks very much for that. How do we cherry pick? If these are immutable laws, if these are what your culture is based on, why do you suddenly decide, oh no, that's what I think God meant? Why do you choose some and not the others? Why do you choose stuff that I have done it myself? I slowly found myself the way that I became an atheist, would you like to know? So I was brought up Catholic, and I have 3 boys. One turns 21 next week, Dominic. Hugo is 17 and Charlie's 16. And Dominic was 4 years old, and he said, who is Jesus? And I said, well, there was this guy called Joseph, and he had this wife called Mary, and she was a virgin. I'll explain that later. And they were going to Bethlehem to have their names counted, and this angel came down to her and said, you're going to become pregnant with the Son of God, but he's also God, but he's... Anyway, so she has this baby, and it's amazing, and it's so exciting that there's these 3 wise men come from miles away because they see a star, and then the baby is the Son of God, but he's also God, and he was sent to earth because we all sin. And I just went, this just sounds like a crock. An absolute crock. And it was at that point that I just realised I could not pass on such illogical thinking and indoctrination to my child. And it was actually at that very moment, as I passed on what had been passed on to me and passed on to my parents through all of that, it was at that moment that I went, I'm an atheist. I always had been. If I had been born into this community, I would have been Jewish. but I realised that I was an atheist and always had, and it felt like to me that I'd been standing in a house for a long time, and the walls one by one were just falling down, and I hadn't even noticed, and suddenly I could see everything. I went from a tiny black and white television to Technicolor IMAX, and I have to tell you, and I have to share with you, that has been the most liberating thing that has ever happened to me. My life has opened up in ways, my heart and my mind. I can think clearly. For someone to say, so you're Catholic, but you're a socialist and you're a feminist, you don't go to church, you're not married, you use contraception, but you pray, what's going on? That cognitive dissonance to carry is exhausting. It makes no sense. You go to university, you get educated, you learn rational thought, critical thinking, you learn to live your values. And putting my name down as Catholic on the census and handing on those medieval Iron Age stories that made no sense ever and were not true. I knew they were not true and real. Why did I hang on to them? Why did I hang on to them for so long? It was tribalism. It was such a part of my identity and it's part of my family. I couldn't separate myself from that. And so I am sympathetic to people in this audience who feel, how can I keep the very, very best part of this incredible rich culture that we can learn so much from, which according to the people who believe is 5,000 years old. The Aboriginal culture we can also learn from. It's 50,000 years old. I think that it's time that we look really clearly about who is benefiting from the structure and the institution of religion so we can move forward. So all of us, we are all parts of humanity so that we can get as humans and as a community, all of us, to the best possible place with the least amount of damage, because these medieval books and these medieval teachings and this superstition is not going to get us there, my friends. I wish for your sake that it will, but it won't. It never was going to. It has got us this far, and it's time that we discard what is not useful to us, that we know is not true and real. We know deep in our heart. If you look at the things that you are saying and doing and the beliefs that you have, the ability to just use your reason and your heart and your passion and your morality and your humanity to look at those things again with fresh eyes as adults, with all of the education and all of the information and all of the evolution that we have, and go, you know what? This doesn't make sense to me anymore.
Okay. Wait, can I just say, you know what? I'm convinced.
I'm done. I am starting my hedge fund.
Look, we haven't got a lot more time left, but we can take some questions.
But I must respond to that.
Okay, but then
respond and then
we'll get some roving microphones, and after
Okay.
Shmuley responds, we'll have some questions.
yeah, I gotta respond to that. I just want to respond by saying I'm selling a book tonight, and
Is there a centerfold of you?
they wanted to put it, but that would have been classified as like in the horror section, and they didn't want to scare people. Let me put my yarmulke back on. Let me put it on real tight, because Catherine's making it shake, and my faith is shaking
No,
here.
you're stronger than that.
Okay.
I want to get some
Okay.
questions.
I must respond to that.
Yeah.
Because you were essentially saying that we're far better off without religion.
We are.
Okay. So, Amalek. Are we better off? By the way, I think your friend really is an Amalekite, and you're just like concealing it for her. Are we better off with a religion that doesn't command us to obliterate Amalek? Amalek was the nation that attacked the Jewish people. They attacked the weak, the stragglers. It was like Hitler, who went after the mentally disabled, the most vulnerable. And God says that anyone that does that becomes Amalek, and they have to be destroyed, because anyone who practices genocide, especially against the weak. You know, the two men who are considered the two greatest statesmen of the 20th century were Winston Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Let me tell you a little bit about them. They ordered the carpet bombing of Dresden, especially Churchill. 45,000 killed in a single night. I took my kids there to see Dresden rebuilt. Hamburg, Berlin. How could you call these men the greatest statesmen of the 20th century? There were a lot of innocent civilians who were killed. It's horrible. Harry Truman was on a boat when he decided, on the way back from the Potsdam Conference, to drop an atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I went to Hiroshima with my wife. I had to see these places. Truman is rated the third greatest president of the 20th century. But they felt that with Nazi Germany, a little bit less so, of course, Imperial Japan, but was such a challenge to the complacency that nobody cared that they were gassing people to death at a rate of 10,000 a day. By the way, to give you an idea of what happens to atheist culture sometimes, if we don't see the infinite sanctity of every human life and making sure that we stop those who engage in genocide. 2.5 million died in Armenia, 1916 to 1918. Hitler famously says, recorded by Martin Bormann in his table talk, no one's going to care about the Jews. Who today talks about the Armenians? Nobody cared. They didn't decide to destroy Amalek, genocide dares. So then they killed 6 million Jews. And even then it wasn't enough. Cambodia, 3.5 million killed, 1975, 1978. Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge. And then the United States under Jimmy Carter decided to try to seat the Khmer Rouge in the seat of Cambodia at the UN. That's how little they hated this Amalek idea of genocide dares actually forming governments. And it just continued. I spoke about Rwanda today. The 25th anniversary is April 7th, next month. 330 killed every day. I want you to tell you how little we cared about destroying Amalek. At that time, it was the Hutus who were taking machetes and killing 330 innocent, poor Africans. And nobody cared about them because they had no oil, they had no money. People were talking about Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. I couldn't care less about that. People's private morality, really, it's their business. But Clinton refused to meet with any of his senior staff. He even once discussed the Rwandan genocide. And the African nations were begging him, fire one missile, just one. Because the entire genocide was being broadcast from an antenna, the RTML antenna. It was all being done by a radio station. A $57,000 US missile could have stopped that genocide, but the United States wouldn't spend $57,000. If we had lived by a commandment to destroy Amalek, that genocide, wherever it erupts, has to be... And I have to tell you, Elie Wiesel spent his life trying to get people to hate those who perpetrate genocide. And it just continues. Darfur, Kosovo, Srebrenica, the Holocaust, it ended nothing. We've never developed a hatred for Amalek. Because we see human life as almost expendable. It's not that bad. It is that bad. And that is what the commandment means. And I wish we were to embrace it, to obliterate any party or nation that perpetrates a whole set. What is Assad doing running Syria? How disgusting is that? The man who killed 500,000 people and gassed innocent Arab Muslim children, and we leave him in power because we have no hatred of him. He is Amalek today. He is the one who is gassing innocent civilians in Damascus, in Aleppo. As far as the prohibition of calling homosexuality an abomination, the Torah does say that. We can't get away from it. And I have a gay Orthodox Jewish brother, very diverse family. And the word abomination appears 122 times in the Bible. Gossip is called an abomination in the book of Proverbs. Arrogance is called an abomination. Eating shellfish is called an abomination. And my brother's a very good man. He's a very good Jew. In many ways, he's a better person than I am. So how do I reconcile that? And I say to my brother all the time that I believe, and this is just my interpretation, I actually believe that sameness attracts sameness. I actually think that men have a lot more in common with other men, and women have a lot more in common than other women. I think that communities barely reach out to other communities because we all are drawn to sameness. As a religious Jew, I have actually struggled to make sure that my community is comprised not only of other Orthodox Jews, and I think part of the prohibition, perhaps, of same-sex relationships is God's also telling us that we can't just be drawn to that which is similar to us. We have to reach across a certain divide. Now, I recognize that the word abomination, and by the way, in the ancient world, of course, the more intellectual a person, the more they were engaged in same-sex partnerships, like the great Greek philosophers. And heterosexuality was frowned upon. It was seen as, and women especially, why would a man want to have a relationship with a woman? You said very correctly that women were degraded. Why would you devote yourself to a woman? Maybe you took an extra push to make sure that we reached across something that was very different. Having said that, my message to LGBT Jews and Christians is that there are 613 commandments, and we're not going to be perfect in all of them. Catherine, the fact is there's probably a lot of laws in Australia that people are not perfect in. It doesn't mean we just get rid of them. It means that we try to be the best citizens we can amidst our own imperfections, and Judaism embraces human imperfection and struggle. And the fact is that LGBTQ in our community should be told, have a mezuzah, keep kosher, put on tefillin, don't eat that nasty bread on Passover, especially if you have 18% Ashkenazi genes. You're probably allergic. I bet you probably vomited up on during Passover. Those Ashkenazi genes can't even absorb that comments during. But let me conclude. But to do what Catherine wants to do, which is get rid of the whole thing. Well, that comes with a certain price tag. It means getting rid of the idea of sacredness and holiness, like on Shabbat, where we don't answer telephones, where we're all being destroyed little by little with electronic intrusions that have so decimated our relationships, our inability to even focus on a conversation. Shabbat is a positive blessing, and I think we need to make Shabbat one day, not just one day a week, but 1 hour a day. I think when you have dinner with your children, it's Shabbat, and you can't answer the phone and you can't text. Getting rid of religion will get rid of that whole day of sacredness.
No, that doesn't happen. I mean, the thing is, there's so much of religion that we can still hold on to. And I think Shabbat is great for all of us. I think we should all do it. And we can,
You're religious! Catherine! Yay!
The idea of putting a line in the sand and saying, we are off duty. We are off duty from sundown to sundown. I think it's a brilliant idea. I think there's so, but we don't have to do it for a religious reason. We can do it for a human reason.
We do it because it's holy. If you take away the holiness, people won't do it. That's what I'm trying to say.
Do it.
Okay? But now you're taking religious ideas, cutting them from their roots, like I said, cut flower ethics, and saying, I'm going to take it without the religion. It doesn't work. It really doesn't work. It's like saying, we're going to have sex without love. It'll work for a little bit. People look at me, well, that actually does work. No. It'll work for a little bit, but emotionless sex usually peters out.
But there are atheists here who observe Shabbat. I know who they are. I know several who are in this audience now. And there are plenty of religious and Orthodox Jews in this room right now who drive their cars, go to Chadstone, turn off lights, and go to football on Shabbat. So you're talking about...
Did you see me today? I only had 1 hour off today.
And we all have 2 sets of books, so we're going to throw some...
Yeah, but we've got a question there.
Great.
Barry, we'll open the floor up. Just finish that thought, Catherine.
No, that's it.
Okay.
I'm really interested in hearing from the audience. Yes.
Karen.
I have a question. It's mainly for Catherine. Do you think that everything is subjective?
That's a good question. Could you extrapolate a little bit more on that?
Wait, can you guys
So the
can hear
question
me?
was, is everything
Alright.
subjective? I just don't like a little bit more information so I can answer.
I more so tends... Oh, no, thank you. I more so tends to morality. Do you think that morality is subjective? And if so, how do we actually evaluate principles?
I think that nothing's created. We're not created in a vacuum. That we see life through the filter which has been created through our own experiences and how we've lived. So morality, I think that's a big question, and I wish it was, but I think that there's too many situations to be able to answer that across the board. Because as far as humanity to this point, I don't think we've ever demonstrated that yet. But hopefully, if we could move towards a place of fairness and of rational thought, that it is possible. Do you think it is?
No. I think it's in saying that morality is subjective, well, I would take that and I would say, when I do an action, I would think to myself, what if everybody universally committed this action? Would society function correctly? And I think that's why the 10 Commandments say things such as adultery, murder, and stealing incorrect. Because when one commits those actions, one says to himself, what if this action was committed universally? I don't think society would function. That's why murder is not allowed. That's why stealing is generally seen as bad, because society just cannot universally function with those principles.
Thank you for your question.
Okay, Karen?
Who's Karen? There you go.
Catherine, thank you for your passion, and also the rabbi's been great the whole weekend. You left out a whole sort of area. You keep talking about atheists. And I have to say...
That's what I've been asked to talk about.
Yeah, but there's something you're not considering, because you're coming at it from an intellectual viewpoint and analysing it only with the head. There are people in this room, and I count myself among them, who have real, tangible experience of God. That the spiritual aspect of it is missing from the way you conceptualise it. So, real experiences, real spiritual experiences, and they're often not connected. Well, they can be connected with something you're doing that's religious, according to one of the 613 mitzvot. Sometimes it can happen on Shabbat. For people in this room, they're different experiences. Some of them, are mind-blowing experiences. They sound like an LSD trip. People are able to connect to God. You are able, I am able to have a real, tangible experience of bringing the spiritual down to earth. And that's what Judaism does. The religion and all of the rules connect you. It's like an umbilical cord. And I want you to just keep that in mind, that we have experiences of God.
Why do you want me to keep that in mind?
Because you left it out, and
Because
I
it
want
doesn't
to say
exist.
No, I'm saying it's real.
That's fine. It can be real in your world. It doesn't exist for me. I don't need to keep it in mind.
But I'm pushing back against your thought.
You can have your own opinion,
And
but you can't have your own facts, I'm afraid.
No, you can. Experience.
Thank you.
Okay, there's a couple of hands up over there, and then we'll go over to the other side.
Thank you very much for being here. Very, very short question. The subject of morality has come up many times tonight, as in invariably and it must inevitably. It's attributed to Dostoevsky. He said, if God does not exist, everything is permitted. Can I have views of the two speakers, please?
And the quick thing was that Dostoevsky said, if God doesn't
If God does
exist,
not exist, everything is permitted.
I'll ask a question back to anybody. What moral decision or action could you not have made without your religion? Because I don't have any need to go out and lie, steal, murder, rape. That's not something I have to stop myself from doing. What moral or ethical decision or action could you not have made without your religion? You take
where those morals come from.
Humans. Humans are awesome. But Shmuley, I'll let you answer that question too.
Okay, Rabbi Shmuley, do you want to comment on that?
I think what Dostoevsky meant was that morality has to either be absolute, because otherwise it's only relative. When the most watched debate that I have ever engaged in was a debate against Christopher Hitchens at the 92nd Street Y in New York City in 2008. It was also the hardest debate I did. He and I were friends, and this was not a friendly debate. Even when it was over, there was like bad blood between us. And I liked him very much, and he was a brilliant, brilliant man, and the best debater I ever encountered in my life. I think the debate has been watched by about 3 million people. And in the middle of the debate, he said, and he was echoing something he had written in his book, God is Not Great. He said, what is it about the Jews? He didn't say it this way, but I'm going to embellish a little bit. He said, the Jews are kind of dumb. And he was halakhically Jewish. His mother revealed to him only in his late 20s that he was Jewish. She was a child of a survivor. She didn't want him to know. She felt he'd suffer. He said, how dumb are the Jews? That they needed to be told by God, kind of echoing what Catherine just said, that she has no need to kill or steal. Why do the Jews have to be told by God not to kill? Like you couldn't figure this out? I mean, thank you. How simplistic a people were you that you needed to be told by God not to murder? And what I said to Christopher Hitchens is, it's not what God said at Mount Sinai that most matters. It's the fact that God said it, that it was God saying it. You see, when Israel captured Adolf Eichmann in 1960 and tried him, he mesmerized the world by how ordinary he was. How does the guy who's writing his wife daily love letters from jail and wearing a cardigan, how does he kill 6 million people? You expect him to be like, Charles Manson, white, taking a knife and putting swastikas into his forehead and helter-skelter with people's blood. That guy kills 6 million people, but not this normal bureaucrat. And it led Hannah Arendt to write her famous book, The Banality of Evil. But the reason is, you can be a totally normal person who engages in genocide so long as you believe you're not killing people. You're killing vermin. You're killing parasites. You're killing rats. Germany had laws against murder. It's just that Jews were not people. So when God says do not murder, it applies to everyone all the time, forever. And there are no excuses. And the Jewish community betrays itself if it ever excuses it. I gave the example. We had a Jewish terrorist. We had Baruch Goldstein in 1994 who walked into a mosque and he murdered 29 innocent Muslims at prayer, including many children. And many people tried to justify what he did, saying that he was a doctor, true. His friends were being stabbed all over the place, Second Intifada, true. And he snapped. Excuse, disgusting. There is no excuse to do what he did. He's a murderer. But people want to excuse him. And my Palestinian brothers and sisters have fallen into this trap of no longer abiding by the Ten Commandments by saying, look, we don't want to kill Jews, but your checkpoints humiliate us. We have no choice but to blow you up. No. That's where it becomes immoral and just disgusting, the excuses that are offered for murder. That's why we need the Ten Commandments. And that's what Dostoevsky said. If you don't have God, everything's permissible. You'll find an excuse for everything. And that's why Israel remains, thank God, a very moral country. Imperfect, but highly moral, especially given the level of threat that it faces, because we Jews are bound by the Ten Commandments. We can't reinterpret do not murder. It can't say, well, do not murder. But it doesn't apply to Hamas, which we can flatten in Gaza because they have a genocidal charter calling for the murder of every Jew, including here in Melbourne, Australia. It doesn't make a difference. And that's why Israel uses pinpoint accuracy. It's not perfect. No military is perfect. There are going to be civilian casualties, and they're tragic. And we mourn the death of any innocent Palestinian. But we're also allowed to defend ourselves. God gave us that right, to say moral arbiter. But I fear a world that does not have God saying, do not murder.
Okay, who's got the microphone?
Is that working? I've just got a comment to make and a question. The first comment is I've devised an index which is called the Hitler Index, which is how quickly in a discussion, in a broad discussion, Hitler is brought up. And I think tonight was brought up within the first 3 sentences, so I thought that was pretty impressive.
What's the purpose of your Hitler Index? What's its objective?
In emotive arguments, especially when Jewish issues are involved, it's often Hitler's brought up very, very quickly, and it's a very highly emotional, an emotive sort of way of going about it. So I just thought that.
Would you rather it not be discussed? Would you rather not be discussed?
No, I'm quite happy for it to be discussed.
I don't understand.
I just think
the Holocaust actually looms large in our
and I'm not saying
communal consciousness.
When we're having a discussion, it gets brought up very quickly and very often. It's just an interesting observation, I think. When we started this discussion, there was the first few words were really, well, what is the definition of an atheist? What is an atheist? And that quickly went on from there. It was brushed over, and then the discussion turned to morality without God. But really, the two issues are quite separate in a sense, because the first question has got to be, and this is what atheism is that if I'm an atheist, then I'm not convinced that God exists. I'm not yet convinced. I could be convinced if the evidence was verifiable, if it was high quality, if it was done to a high level, then I would accept that God exists. But at the moment, without that evidence, the only position I can take is that God's existence. He's not guilty of convincing me that he exists, and that's really what atheism is. Some atheists take it a bit further and say, "Well, I don't think there is a God. I'm actually saying there is no God."
Please.
So the question really is that if the position of atheism is, which it is that I'm not yet convinced that God exists, why can't Judaism, why can't scholars give me evidence that really God does exist, something that's verifiable, high quality, that meets the standards of the highest levels of evidence? Because if you did, you'd win the Nobel Prize. You'd win probably 10 Nobel Prizes, but nobody's won it. So why hasn't that evidence been found?
Okay, so that's really an issue of faith. So Rabbi Shmuley, what would you answer to that?
Well, very briefly, you make the mistake of believing that I'm here to proselytize. Judaism is not here to convert the world to Judaism. We're not a proselytizing faith. We are here to convert the world to Jewish values. And I think we should proselytize Jewish values among all nations. That is not the Jewish faith. It's values mean the infinite value of human life, the infinite equality of every human life, that money and resources should be deployed to charitable philanthropic ends, that the Sabbath and holiness and all that is precious should be placed before the urgent. I could go on what I consider the essential Jewish values. I believe that Jew and non-Jew alike, I believe that Jew and non-Jew alike can practice those values. Because Judaism, as I said before, is an action-oriented religion. We are here to get people to do good, not to think good, not to believe good. And I have the highest respect for Catherine for coming out here tonight to an audience that is not her community. She could easily have perceived it to have been a hostile audience. I have often spoken in front of hostile audiences, and I know I think you've been very courageous. I think you've been amazing. It's a fascinating conversation. I'm not here to change her at all. I think she's a good woman. I respect her, and I've enjoyed this conversation immensely. It's been one of the better conversations I've had in quite some time. I'm not here to convert. Let me just say one final thing, though. But I make no apologies for talking about the Holocaust. I remember, my wife will remember, that when the Berlin Wall came down in, 1989, I had just become the rabbi at Oxford. And the man named, I think I'm right in saying this, I think his name, Karl Christoph Schweitzer, was, I think, the Speaker of the Bundestag. And we asked the German embassy to send someone to do an Oxford debate, and we had a pre-debate dinner at our home, and I think it was Karl Christoph Schweitzer, sent by the embassy, very senior. We were amazed. I guess Germany really wanted to make the case as to why reunification was acceptable. And he was a nice guy, but he sat at our table, and I'm not making this up. And we had children of survivors and a lot of Israeli students and Jewish students and non-Jewish students, Rhodes Scholars. And I think he said something like, when will the Jewish community stop putting the Holocaust as like an albatross around the neck of the Germans? This is a previous generation, we didn't do it. And I was sitting there thinking, they sent him? Okay. 6 million Jews were killed 70 years ago. I met tons of survivors here over Shabbos. I met a man who was born in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1941 as a member of the shul. I met a man, I spoke about Mordechai Chaim Rumkowski, who ran the Lodz Ghetto. Then someone walked over to me, I don't want to say his age because I don't know if I'm permitted, and he cleaned up the Lodz Ghetto, the Łódź Ghetto, and he laid his eyes on Mordechai Chaim Rumkowski. They're alive here. We make no apologies for remembering the 6 million. I will make no apologies for any kind of Hitler index.
But Shmuley, can I just develop that a little further? The question was really saying, if you can't prove that God exists, why should anybody believe it? So what's the answer to that?
I thought the question was, why haven't we been able to prove it? And can I just jump in there as one of the very few atheists here? Yeah, it's not that we go, he doesn't exist. There's no proof. And people will often say to me, what would it take for you to believe that? Well, what's interesting with me with proof and evidence is that religious people will use entire different evidence for their lawyers and their doctors and the cars that they buy and their finances than they do, put a net over these other things. So if I found that God exists, if I went out and I found and we all agreed that God exists and God was there, that is one question. But what my response would be to say, you are a monster. You're an absolute monster. If you are all-powerful, if you are omnipotent, if you see all and can do all, and you have chosen to do so many horrible things, disastrous things, to so many individuals and communities, you are a monster.
Well, true. That's a different question. Meaning,
Yeah,
the question of whether God exists and the question of whether God is good are very different questions. Many of the Holocaust survivors who I know, they didn't stop believing in God's existence. They stopped believing in God's goodness, and that bothered them tremendously. When my daughter was my daughter's 30 was 16 years old, she was doing a school book project on Elie Wiesel's Night. And I called up Elie Wiesel. It shows you the character of the man. And I said, can my 16-year-old daughter interview you? And he agreed. And I sat there, she taped it, and she asked Elie Wiesel, do you still believe in God after the Holocaust? Like, he said all these horrible things that God watched and didn't intervene. He intervened and split the Red Sea. Why didn't he destroy the crematoria? And Elie Wiesel said, I do believe in God. He said, but my relation with God has changed. When I was a boy, he was a Vizhnitzer Chassid growing up in Sighet in Romania. He said that God was his close friend. God was immanent. He could experience God much along the lines of what, I don't know what your name is, I'm so sorry, but you said it.
Karen.
What? Karen. He said now he feels much more of an equal to God, that he's allowed to object and protest because he's very, as he wrote in his books, very, very pained at God's seeming indifference. And that's a fair comment, and we Jews make the same demands. The word Israel means he who wrestles with God, spars with God, challenges God. But, as far as proofs are concerned, look, philosophers offer the ontological proof, the teleological proof, the argument from design. The problem is that there is resistance in the human mind to accepting an all-powerful creator. But if I were to say to you, this is not my argument, it's an argument I read in a book, but imagine, Catherine, if Neil Armstrong, about whom that movie First Man was just made, a great movie, didn't get the Oscars it deserved, but he steps out and sees this incredible landscape on the moon, and no man has ever been there before, and he's the first man, that's what the movie's called, and he sees, say, a Coke can right there. Would you accept that that's sufficient proof that someone had preceded him on the moon?
Yes.
Okay. But a Coke can is nowhere near as complex as the human eye or DNA. So then you'll respond, oh, but that complexity came about through billions and billions of years of evolutionary change and genetic mutation. And my response to that is atheists and religious people agree. They just call it different things. What I call God, you call time. Richard Dawkins believes that if you give something enough time, it will always happen. So time is omnipotent. So time is infinitely powerful. It's just a different name. It becomes a word game.
I think that quote from Sherman Wine is really relevant here. He said, after the Holocaust, the kindest thing that we can say about God is that he doesn't exist. It's something worth thinking about. Have we got, it'd be great to hear one or two quick questions.
Okay.
There's one over
There's
here.
one
It's been
here.
a very long night.
We'll take two more questions.
Your
I'm
patience
going to
and
be
your
very quick. Firstly, Rabbi, thank you so much for your appearance on Q&A. You disproved Cardinal Pell's theory that the Jewish people lacked intellect.
Oh, that was outrageous that he said that.
When he went on Q&A, he has proven what he really is now. So thank you for that, and you were clearly a shining star on Monday night.
Thank you. It's true.
I've got a question for you, Catherine.
Oh yes, please.
Given that you don't believe in marriage, either of the religious kind or the state
That's right.
secular kind,
Yes.
how do you feel about the fact that the government treats you and your partner as being married, but instead of calling it marriage, they call you de facto?
I've written about that quite extensively, and I'm appalled by it. I hate the word de facto. It's like the Mormons baptizing the dead people and calling them Christians. Don't call me a cheap version of what you consider is the gold standard of relationships. My relationship is not good enough for marriage. My relationship is not worthy of marriage. It's so much better than that. So I would like to put a class action through to remove in our government documents that term de facto. I'm quite happy to be called a cohabitating partner. But that term de facto, you're telling me what I am when I have consciously opted out of that institution for moral and ethical reasons. I find that term really demeaning and appalling, and also very revealing, because it shows people will say, oh, your husband. And I'll say, no, my partner. And he'll go, or my boyfriend, or whatever I choose to call him. And they'll go, oh, same thing. And I go, how would you know? You're married. If it's same thing, why did you not get married? And no, it's not, and I don't want him to be my husband. If I wanted to, I would have a husband. So it's a good question, and I know that language might seem really petty, but you all know how important language is. I'd love to see us drill down a little bit more into that. It's very interesting when, with married people, I'll refer to them as partner, and they'll go, oh no, my wife. And it's just like, well, don't you see it, relationships as equal? It's like, oh yeah, but you need to, it will reveal that they have ranking systems for relationships and honorifics that we use for each other. So that's a great question. Thank you for asking.
Okay. I'm just a little bit worried. The more that Catherine speaks about how horrible marriage is, I just see my wife nodding. and
Relationships, marriage was invented, love was not. Love is beautiful.
Okay, we've got, who's got the microphone?
Hi.
Along.
Go for it.
This is Israel's most famous didgeridoo player. Please give a round of applause. We're very lucky to have him here.
Thank you. So, when I listened to both of you, I had the feeling that you're actually very similar, and you're both, in my experience, have similar energy and coming from the same place, and big passion to show that you are right and to prove that you have the truth within you. And it feels like the entire discussion is based on the point of finding the right answer and solving the problem, and maybe even looking at life as a problem that needs to be solved, and we're here to find what will be the right answer for everyone. So my question is, who said that there is an ultimate truth that has to be right for everyone? Who said we are here to find the right answer that is waiting for us to discover it, about whether there is a God or not? And I feel it's a very similar thing to say religious is the right answer or religious is not the right answer. It's still playing the same game of what's right.
So are we looking for answers? Are we looking for answers?
So my question is, what prevents you from accepting that he has a God? And what prevents you from accepting that you don't have a God and someone else has Jesus as a God, and everyone has a different life and a different perspective, and maybe it's okay.
That's a good point. I'm only here it's about my own enlightenment and other people's enlightenment. I know that it's taken me a long time to become the person I am and to have morals and values for myself in all levels of my life, emotional, financial, social, that fit with me the best. And I know that the way that I got to this place was by a lot of conversations and discussions, little seeds that were planted. So I'm just here, and if what I say makes you more solid in your beliefs, fantastic. That's a great reason to come out. There was this woman and she was crazy, and so I know what I believe even more. That's great. And if there's other people going, she's great and I believed everything she said and I love it and that's great, go away. It's the people, it's the low-hanging fruit that I'm interested in. The people who there's a bit of friction in their mind, in their heart, and it's not sitting quite well with them. So I've come along to have this discussion. And again, I thank you all for coming. Amazing patient, incredible turnout. It's very late, and I just can't thank you enough. It means so much to me. But I just wonder,
No, I'm sorry.
No.
Okay. You'll have to speak to him later. So.
Yeah. So that's what I'm here just to help us get to the best possible place with the least amount of damage.
Rabbi Shmuley, are we looking for something? That was the question. Are we looking for something?
Yeah. Is there a yes, no? Is there an answer? Is that what we're here for? If we're not here for a direct answer, what are we here for? Enlightenment, comfort.
Why is
clarity?
Why are we humanity here? Or?
No, I mean why we're here tonight.
Oh.
If he says we seem like very similar people to him, so
Yeah.
the point.
Well, you know what?
Inspiration.
Well, I would say this, and with this I'll also sign off. I will answer the question, but let me first thank, if you don't mind, everyone at Caulfield Synagogue for hosting me and my wife so warmly this weekend. I think this might be my fourth visit to the shul. Rabbi Genendi, thank you for your friendship and your guidance and your inspiration to this community and allowing me to be a part of it. I so enjoy coming to your shul. Thank you very much. You've created I think it's a mark of your. Let's all end on a very positive note.
Shmuley for president. 2026.
Oh God, Trump is going to start tweeting about me. Okay. I think it's a mark of your intellectual openness that you invite conversations like these at your shul, and we're very grateful. And to my very dear friend Robert Wheel, who organized everything over the past few months. Thank you for your friendship, and I was telling my wife today as we were walking home from shul how much I admire you. Your entire life is the community. Your passion is the community, and Israel, and Judaism, and humanity, and in your gentlemanliness, you're a true Kiddush Hashem. So thank you for everything. To my new friend and sparring partner, Catherine, thank you. I agree with what one of the questioners said. Thank you for your passion. And your humanity and your goodness, and of course you can be a good person while being a committed atheist. Let's get that on the record so that no one debates it. It's absolutely true. Just can't be as good as me. And, I will be signing books. Please don't make me take these back home. I'm begging you. And I look forward to visiting with the community in Melbourne again. I love Australia. It's such a unique country. And Australia produces incredibly strong and powerful women like Catherine. You are a unique Australian creation. That's a beautiful thing. Australians they're just fully alive, very, very alive people. And so I married an Australian, so that kind of proves that I believe this.
Once you've had an Aussie chick, you don't go back.
Okay, look,
let me ask the question now and then I'm done. My friends, we came here tonight because the Jewish people are about enlightenment, and we're not afraid to ask questions. And I don't think we're a religion that claims to have all the answers. Those who make that claim, they're fraudulent and they're arrogant. For us Jews, the most important thing is not to have the right answers, but it's to ask the right questions at all times. And we're not afraid of questions. And questions are open-ended, and they invite conversation. And that's why Cardinal Pell was wrong about us. He wasn't wrong about us because we produced Freud or Einstein or Shmuley Boteach in that order. He was wrong about us because true intellectuals love engaging in intelligent dialogue and conversation, and they don't fear, they don't suppress. To the contrary, I would say to my Catholic brothers and sisters that we can learn so much from the Catholics, and they can learn a great deal from us. And one of the things that the Catholic tradition can learn from us is to be more open, a little bit less doctrinaire, in the same way we can learn so much from Catholicism. I love the idea that people can go to a priest and confess their sins and feel that a compassionate voice is listening to them so that they feel absolved in some way. It still requires repentance in our tradition, but that somebody cares. And priests can be very loving people, and we can't tar everybody with a very broad brush, while we hold those who are guilty of monstrous crimes fully accountable. So that's what makes an intelligent and intellectual people, and that's why we're here tonight. And I think this has been a fascinating conversation, and I thank you. God bless you.
Thanks, Rabbi Shmuley.
I'd like to thank the Shul for having me. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for coming and being open-minded. To have a vigorous, engaging conversation has been made for a beautiful Saturday night for me. I'd like to leave you with I think it's a line from the Bible. Hell is truth seen too late, the truth will set you free. I run writing masterclasses. If you would like to come and get a pamphlet, they're very famous. There's been 4,500 people since 2014. I've got some in my bag. Come and have a chat afterwards. I'll be hanging around for a bit. I can't thank you enough. Thank you for having me, and thank you for your